All right. Well, good morning, Greg, on this chilly morning by you, I'm guessing. It's that time of year now, so it's probably like is it above 0 degrees
It
right
is
now, or is it okay? Well, that's good.
seven above zero.
So,
So, which
there's
people don't
lovely.
think about that, Brian, until they look at 32 as being freezing, and
Yeah,
they get an idea.
yeah,
But it's
exactly.
but it's four times warmer than it was yesterday morning. You do the math.
I don't even know. I wouldn't know how to do that. That's too much for me. All right.
But
So,
just understanding that there is math is enough.
yeah.
Anybody out there that knows us knows, wow, that must be colder, right?
So
Wow.
the kind of overall topic is going to be about naming conventions and why they matter, right? So how we name things, why we name them, and we're going to get into kind of a few different sort of, I guess, subtopics, a few different areas in there about, the intent behind a name. What are you doing with it? Is it used to explain something? We'll talk about lexicons in general and priming, meaning how calling something a certain thing will elicit certain responses, and will influence how you process what that is, whether it's the
Yep.
name, title of a movie, our title of our podcast, whatever it is. When you call something, give something a name, it's important, and sometimes not a lot of thought is put into that, and sometimes a lot of thought is put into that,
Yes.
especially when it's something high dollar amount. I always look to the movie industry for that, where they'll make the entire movie, do the sort of the preview for a small audience, and then they'll kind of walk up like, "Hey, man, we got to change the title of that.
Yep.
That
We're
didn't
losing
do
this
it." Yeah,
entire potential
yeah,
audience,
and
right?
and
Or
just by
yeah.
changing the name of it automatically completely kind of changes the it almost changes up the context so much, right? So it changes up how relevant that is. All right, but I want to do kind of start with you because I know you got a good story about that will kind of tie in some of the lessons we're going to be talking about today. So I'd love to sort of throw it to you to start with that.
Yeah, and I hope I'm going to tell the right story because I got so many written down here this morning. No, it's such information happens, Brian, when all of a sudden you're thrust on the camera comes on and you go, "Wow, that would be a great story," and you don't want to
Yeah,
avoid
yeah,
mission creep. So
yeah,
I've separated in my brain clever and cleaver, and the clever means that wow, I can learn something from it, and the cleaver means that's so stupid that I want to attack you with an implement of
I,
cutting edge.
I like
Uh,
that. Though that'll be an overall thing. We'll
you
follow
get
up on
what
the
I mean,
clever
though, right?
clever versus cleaver. I like that.
Exactly. I remember going down and taking a look and taking a ride with Shelly on a horse that we were about to buy from a dear friend of ours. We had 44 horses. You got to keep the numbers up because you get different riders, different terrain, whole side story. But the idea was that we went and saw a horse named Twister. And the horse was named Twister because it was unsafe in the gate. And when it started backing up, it would twist around and it would crush you against the wall of the pen. It would, dump a rider in the arena. It would dump a rider coming through the gate before they mounted to get to the arena. There was just these horror story after horror story, and it was called Twister. And so, right on its brand, it had a different name, God rest its soul, and it was a square letter D brand from where it had been trained and bought some years ago. And so I looked at these guys with fascination. I go, "Have you ever been sued?" And they go, "Oh, yeah, but it's a great horse. I mean, it's bomb-proof horse, but it's not really bomb-proof because it throws a lot of people." And I'm like, "Well, did you ever think that maybe you were priming some of that? Why didn't you call the horse Square D?" Brian, they all looked at each other like it was I came off of Mars. You know what I'm saying? I just came out of a UFO. And they go, "Why would we do that?" And I go, "Well, Square D doesn't start at Twister. Twister literally means that you
Yeah,
knew or should have known that this horse was going to spin around and throw you or dump you." And they sat there and they go, "You know what? We never thought of that." But you know who thinks of that, Brian? Attorneys think of that.
yep,
Litigious people think of those things. So there's two things really that are going on there. One, are you being clever? Twister, hey,
yeah.
that bastard twisted around and just dumped me. Or are you being cleaver? Holy shit, we're setting ourselves up for a lawsuit that could close down our part of the industry, our dude and guest ranch, our riding facility. You get it? So now that clever cleaver part comes right in there. So, I think I won't attribute, but there was a person that you're very familiar with that we worked with in a different life whose call sign was Poacher. Now,
Right.
Poacher is a really, really good call sign inside because it's an inside joke down and in. And it wasn't poaching eggs, Brian. I'll just give you that. And it was a very real legal standard. That's why the name came up, because there was trouble in paradise, right? So that was a cleaver. Now we wanted to be clever and throw it out there,
Right.
thinking, wow, look how smart and clever we are. But when it came down at the end of the day, we were kind of really using a naming convention. We were more involved in taxonomy than we knew. And what were we setting up for a potential future? We were priming unintentionally, yet we were exposing ourselves to risk deliberately. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and this is why that stuff is so important, because in hindsight you can look back and be like, wow, we probably really should have seen that coming when we bought that horse
What were
Twister.
we thinking? Right?
And but at the time, you're not thinking of it, but it really,
Yep.
it shows that you knew a lot more than you really thought you did, or you
Yep.
should have known something. You brought up, of course, when it comes to liability, where you
Yeah.
knew or should have known, right? And I think of so many different people with different call signs or nicknames, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Someone who was like, oh, that's Hammer. It's like, why is it Hammer? It's like, oh,
Yep.
because he comes in and puts the hammer down. It's like, okay, could we potentially see that spiraling out of control in some situations?
Exactly. You don't want to name one of your trainers rapey,
Yeah.
because he gives off a rapey vibe when he shows up. God's
Yeah.
crying because he's here now. Yeah, but think about that for a minute, because like, what buyer's remorse is, right? So
Hmm.
I would say the clever cleaver standard has to be where you go, wow, everything feels right. This feels like the right thing to do. Let's sleep on it, or let's use socialization, or let's interpret what spirals could come from this event, right? If we do it that way, like what's life trying to tell me right now, when all of a sudden I come in and this person, like, look at the elves. We always go back to Disney because he was a genius in
Yeah.
human
Oh
behavior, right?
yeah.
But what did we expect to get out of Sleepy?
Yep.
You know, what were we thinking when we said Dopey? What's your idea? Yeah. So if we take, and I'm not saying dumb it down, because that's simple and it's wrong. What I'm saying is that you have to take a look 360. You have to give you a perfect example. Just happened this morning. Just read an article before you came on about an investigation in a part of Colorado, non-attribution again, for indecent exposure, and a number of investigative sources that went along with it. So the first thing that comes to mind: priming, chemicals,
Yeah.
emergency, your primitive brain. The
Yep.
first thing is somebody exposed themselves to a bunch of kids on a school bus. You bastard! If I was there, I would beat you to death. Had nothing to do with it. This is Colorado. Wavy gravy, chili palmer, pass the bong. What happens is there are a bunch of springs, and these springs are hot springs, and this is the time in the season that people will park on the road, take off their clothes, and walk into the hot spring right at the side of the road, and then they'll smoke a joint with a couple of other people, and they'll have great fellowship, Brian, and they'll get back into their car and they'll go to work. This is so common, it's ridiculously normal. But what does somebody driving by from Iowa see? Holy crap, a bunch of
Yeah.
naked people wandering around by the roadside. They call it, and now the dispatcher has to name it something. Do I have public nudity, public indecency, indecent exposure? Well, what do those words mean? So words are hugely strong. And here we have, Brian, if we were going to name a bias, we'd call it the dispatcher bias,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
dispatcher's got to write down the card and say words. You get what I'm trying to say? So you can put your thumb on the scale accidentally, or incident for that matter, with just a word, and a wrong placed word or title or name at the wrong time can lead people to have theater of the mind and go straight to cleaver.
And
It
and
could
and
be
you,
bad.
no, exactly. And it's also gets into why we use our, because there's, you brought up, which I forgot to mention, taxonomy, which is more about kind of sort of classifying different things, right?
Right. So it's
Which is
a
more
lexicon would
formal.
be on one side of the
Well,
coin. A taxonomy would be the other side of the same coin,
because
right?
we have our own
Yep.
lexicon that we use,
Yep.
and everyone does. And a lexicon just kind of any sort of sayings or terms kind of within a certain context, or certain, like there's
Yep.
certain professional sports have different lexicons, like what they call things,
Yep.
but we have our own on here, and you use that deliberately, right? Because some of it can be simple to, again, prime a certain response or a
Yep.
certain a shared file. It's almost like a meme. It's a way to transmit a significant amount of information in a very short word or sentence or description, to where the person receiving that automatically knows what that means, right?
Yeah, it's a
So
barcode. It's a barcode that goes by your brain so quickly that you're not scanning, but your brain goes, oh, I get what they're intimating. I get where they're leading me. And therefore that becomes sticky. In other words, a neural path is created and it's myelinized, so it's faster than another neural path, which means you get there quicker. And that can be the key to winning or surviving, right?
Well, right, and it's like when we talk about, we've used it before in the past. Are you up and out, or are you down and in? And it's a very
Exactly.
simple understanding of, are you down and in, so focused on what you're, that you're almost, you lose any sort of external arousal. You don't even notice it anymore.
Yep.
But or are you up and out and paying attention? Because it's very simple for me to look at you, go, hey, that guy's down and in, and go, oh, okay, that's why he's not
And we
hearing me.
both are
But
on
we,
the same theory level, view, perception,
rather than saying,
definition. Exactly.
he's distracted by something else and he's not paying attention to what you're saying, Greg. I could say all that, or I could say he's down and
Yep.
in.
Yep.
It transmits the same amount of information. So these things are wildly important,
Hugely
extremely
important.
important, and that's how things can go wrong sometimes, or lead to sort of these errors in sense making that we talk about
Yes.
a lot,
Yes.
simply by the call. You get the call, is it there there's a man with a gun in the park, or was it someone reported that, I think I saw a gun? Because those are two
Right.
completely different things, right? One is
Or a
saying,
man
oh,
in the park that said he had a gun. And
i-
so you're exactly right. So now what we're doing is we've got that spiral. The rotor's spinning, the spark plug is going, and we're generating combustion whether we intended to or not. And that's the key. What were your intentions, and have they been met? Have my outcomes been met by what I'm saying? Because have I lit the fuse on 4 different potential spirals, Brian, that have nothing to do with what I intended by my first phone call? And did you take the ball and run with it? And now we're playing that damn telephone game. What did you say? Oh, some guy killed a guy in a park.
and
Here we go.
and that goes back to kind of the big, the big sort of one of the big takeaways in what we're discussing today, is that intent, right? What
Yes.
was your intent when you named it that? Because sometimes people go, well, I didn't really think of it, or I just saw it out there, or I thought it
Yep.
was clever, you know what I mean? Or
Yep.
it came to me. It's like, well, hang on, what are we talking about here? Because the intent behind it is everything. Like,
Yep.
even with, I give the example of the podcast Left of Greg. Well, that's kind of an inside joke, right? If you get
Yes.
it, one,
If you get it. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
always sitting to the left of you when we're driving, right? And
Yep.
so that was where these discussions sort of came from. The idea behind the podcast was us driving around when we're going to training or traveling somewhere, right? And I'm always sitting to the
Exactly.
left of you, so I'm sitting to the left. And then it was a take on the term the left of bang. And so it was a joke with multiple levels. But if you don't get it and you're just walking this Left of Greg show, what is that? I mean, you would
And
literally have no idea what our show is about.
if you and I just giggle every time somebody says it, but we're not getting new listeners and we're not opening
Well,
minds, then have we missed what our intent was, right?
Exactly,
It's so simple.
and it goes back to this, why it affects everything that we do,
Yeah.
and how people perceive certain things, which is why we, of course, always go back to what was their intent, because a lot of times people name things or do it and just there was zero intent behind it. They just thought of some description to call something and thought it was clever, or just didn't
Yep.
even put any time into it. When you have
Or it
this,
rhymed, or it looked good when they wrote it. In calligraphy, that font is a lot better. I give you another one, and today is a bad day for Gunnison and Gunnison County, because I got to use non-attribution, because these people are still alive, or their
and
relatives still live around here, right? So,
yeah,
and I live here. So, Brian, there was a guy from many different genres of interest called Shooter Bob, and he was a security person
okay,
at a
well,
place locally. Okay, so right away, you get what I'm trying to
I
say?
already
Do I need to go further with this?
I already have a
Okay,
mental image of what
right.
you're talking about, so that's
So
powerful.
when people go, Bob, and then somebody would look and go, Bob, and they go, Shooter Bob, and everybody go, oh, right away they knew Shooter Bob. So and let me get the other side of that. you're still thinking, okay, they're talking about something, but I don't see the harm. Be a cop or a soldier and be accused of a negligent discharge. Okay. Now, there's another
you fired
standard.
your weapon,
You fired your weapon.
and
Okay.
when you weren't supposed to, didn't mean to, right?
You got it. So then you also have the next standard, which is the same standard, accidental discharge. You hear law enforcement saying that a lot, but what it actually is an unintended
Yes.
discharge. And you're going, they're all the same.
No, they're
Not in a
not.
court of law, they're not. Not when you're up for your, Article 15. Not
Yeah.
when somebody is taking your weapon and strip. How many people back in the day, Brian, during Glow-Watt, you came up and somebody was carrying a shotgun at the gate, and you go, "Oh, security must be high." But then you looked at that soldier's holster and it was empty. That means that they didn't qualify in their weapon. It meant a completely different thing. So the only weapon they had qualified on, they're carrying at the gate, right? What I'm saying and what you're saying, and what's very important here, is that if we don't match our intent, if we don't match our desired outcome with that taxonomy or lexicon or research or nickname or something, then we can do a great disservice. You know, the bullying is one thing, but then getting tagged with a nickname for the rest of your life, like,
Yeah.
that's quite another thing. Well, that wasn't my intent. Yeah, but it happened. So how do we rein that in? That's one logical question. How do we see that coming? And those are critical thinking skills. Those are things we don't consider in the moment that have ramifications that are going to live long after you and I.
No, and it's we because this is a normal part of human communication to kind of give
Yes.
things a name or call it something, especially a lexicon, especially within, if anyone listening, just think of, where you work or your family, you have your own language, right? Because language is so adaptive and it's just constantly
Yes.
changing, right? You have your own internal dialogues, your own language, like with your family. You think about talking to your kids, like, it's funny, like how many little nicknames Michaela already has for Max and what she calls him
That's
based on how his behavior.
amazing.
And it's so
Yeah.
funny
What
because
time of day? What's going
yeah,
on?
what's he doing? Oh, he's got the sillies tonight, silly Max, because he's goofy and laughing all night. And
That's
he's like,
so
oh,
funny.
I call him Mad Max when he gets upset when he hasn't eaten in a while. You know what I mean? But
That's wonderful.
the idea you start calling it all those things, and that's since it's a natural part of human communication.
Yep.
We sometimes fall short or we don't put enough effort into what we're calling like this program that we built or the training thing that we're going to do
Yeah.
or what we're going to set up here, because even us with some of the courses we teach, like, we don't have like an off-the-shelf thing. I mean, we do in the sense of like when we're training a certain audience, like a law enforcement security office, or audience, there's going to be most of 80% of it's going to be similar, or 60% of it's going to be
Because the
similar.
KSAs are
Yeah,
similar, of
are
course.
similar, but what we even what we've called things, and then that's why we kind of came up with the navigating high risk human encounters, and people are like,
Yep.
oh, okay, because it's just meant to elicit, like, what does that mean? That's a general term. It's not, very, very specific. That could
Right.
mean a lot of things, but that's sort of the point in some way, because then we follow up, proactive detection of threats and opportunities. It's like, okay, well, that's also looking at two sides of the coin. So there's a lot in it, and it's deliberate when we do those things, because we've
Yes.
used different names for different courses before based on the clientele and what we're calling it, right? And the point is, it automatically sets some of the context for the information you're about to receive. And
It's
so
a
if
form of priming.
it's a form of priming,
Exactly.
and that's what I was getting at. So when you
Yeah.
do that, it makes the information more digestible, and it gives
Yep.
that context, so I don't have to figure it out as much. So if I'm just hearing it for the first time, I'm less likely to go to a wrong area, right? I'm less likely to go, oh, that must mean that over there. And how many times does
Right.
that happen, even with different consumer products, with different, I always go back to movie stuff, because those titles really elicit something. They put a lot of time, a lot of creative energy goes into
Yes.
that, and by a bunch of people who are, subject matter experts in their field of film and making movies. And so they take all this time.
And they're sitting around a table and they're working for
Exactly. And go,
months
what about this?
to
And
yep,
let's do a test audience. And how does that play on them?
precisely.
Because why? Because it's so important up front, meaning that initial exposure exposure to some piece of information is
Yep.
so extremely powerful, even in a totally, a relaxed, calm, benign environment, right? Now you throw some sort of stressful thing into that, or something
Yep.
chaotic, or something controversial, man, that becomes even more powerful what someone called it. And I don't think we take a lot of time to do that sometimes, simply because of the nature of communication and how
Right,
much people talk.
because communication spills out of our mouth at a rate that's not controlled by our thinking brain. Okay, so we're just reacting to those things that are around us and responding. Good way of looking at that. And you made a great example about how a big business has to spend a lot of time and create pilots and
Hmm.
suggestions before they actually come up with it. Take a look at my backyard right now. It's snowing outside. Okay, so I already told you it's 7 degrees and it's snowing. So 7 degrees snow and below zero snow, and at freezing 32 degrees snow, and a few degrees more, 35, 38, 40 degrees snow. Yes, it can snow at 40 degrees, trust me. The idea is each one of those is a different snow. Now, you have sleet, you have hail, which are forms of condensed cold moisture,
Hmm.
right? But they're not snow. And then you've got thunder snow, Brian.
Yeah,
You've
I've
seen
got
that,
video. I have. I've
right?
got video of
When
it.
okay, so and you've seen thunder and lightning during a snowstorm. Uh, uh, Only in Colorado, folks. Maybe you have the same experience where you live. What I'm trying to say is, then we look back to the ancient Inuits, or we look to a different culture, and somebody always comes up with a statistic. I don't know where they
Yeah.
get it, but they go, "Well, did you know the Inuits had 37
Yeah. Yeah.
names for
Whatever it is.
snow?" Yeah, and they only had one for polar bear, right? But they had
Yeah.
37 for snow, because polar bear was all the time run, right? But the idea there is that those things that we now are understanding why taxonomy and lexicon are very different, right? Those things that over time are adopted, like killer bee, right? Okay, I
Hmm.
get it. These bees along the border, killed other bees and colonies, and if enough of them got on you, they would kill you. But once you ring that bell, you can't take it back. So what was it last year? It was murder wasps, and then it
Oh,
was
the murder hornets. Yeah.
suicide.
Yeah. Yeah.
There, you
Yeah.
remember? And so now we've got to come up with nuclear,
Yeah.
infused wasp
Well,
bite.
well,
Well,
murder implies intent. I mean,
right.
so it's like, wait a
Right. They're
minute.
thinking.
They're
They're all
thinking.
sitting on the hedge out there going, that
I'm gonna
guy
go.
comes out to mow
Yeah,
the
I'm gonna
lawn,
kill him.
fucking dead. Okay, but the idea is, as funny as that is, Brian, that's how things are created. So we have to, going forward, we can accept whatever happens. As a matter of fact, look at how all of these places that used to make encyclopedias but still create dictionaries are just now in a very different format online. They pick a new word of the year, or they pick a
Yeah,
term of the year.
to
Why?
add in.
Because
Yeah.
it's so profoundly magic that you have the ability with mere words to change or modify somebody's opinion or mitigate situations. Stop means a lot, in a lot of different ways, except in Colorado, where everybody's smoking the kind bud and standing and watching a stop sign waiting for it to turn green. And you got to go out there and push them along their path. That's I don't mean that as a joke. That actually happens. But those ideas. So let's go back real quick to
Yeah.
priming.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
electrochemical neurotransmitters in your brain create these connections, and I always use file folders. Some people still argue, well, they're not file folders. The brain's not set up that way. Study more. They are. And what happens is file folders influence other file folders, and they grow. They grow in complexity. They grow in fidelity, and they spread load to different corticals of the brain, different areas, different hemispheres of the brain. Why? So you can come to a conclusion that's reasonable much more quickly than the environment is unfolding in front of you. Why? Because it's a survival trigger. So you have a chemical survival trigger that is naturally going to collate and staple and correct and put information in folders for you. But its intent is always honorable. You sometimes create a fractured file folder. You create a file folder that's not whole. You create that one snowflake that comes down and goes sideways rather than straight down, and you don't notice it right away. Why? Because how many words do you use in a day? How much
Yeah.
stuff do you think about during a day? How many interactions do you have, right? So what happens is that file folder is created too. and it's not the right file folder. It's the demented, broken file folder. Okay, but guess what, Brian? It's still picking up stuff. It's like a garbage can in a hallway, and you forgot about the garbage can, but everybody else walking by didn't, and they're still throwing shit into it. So
Right.
you have to be careful, because if you allow that to grow, it can grow exponentially over time and lead you to the wrong conclusion. You can see a thing, you can assign an importance to the thing and then drift away from it and then come back to it a couple other times on your way to work. And all of a sudden what you've created is a knowledge of that thing, and that knowledge is faulty. So those file folders can be worse than having no file folder. And so I just want to say that sometimes you're saying neg discharge in a court of law, so you were negligent. Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to prove, Your Honor. Title 42, Section 1983, and you win your lawsuit. So we have to be careful, Brian, when we're building file folders or reviewing them, let's say, that our sense-making and problem-solving was sound in every one of those aspects.
And part of the reason why I wanted to kind of discuss this with you on here is because being what we do and talking about behaviors, we always say, obviously even the saying, actions speak louder than words, and we're so focused on what people do is far more important than what they say. And it's not that, because language as we know it today has only been around so long, and it's so adaptive, and it's constantly changing, and when the meaning behind words change all the time. That's a normal part of human communication. And so we say, no, it doesn't matter as much what someone says, but words do still matter, especially when you call something because it automatically you attribute value to things that you otherwise wouldn't. And it ties into the social media arguments and why so many people get on there and get into these divisive debates on social media. As part of it, it's not just the it's not because that's who that person necessarily is all the time. It's because of the context of the situation and how I took something simply by the words you chose to use. It's devoid of any meaning or context,
Brian,
when it's just in print. And it's always been around like that for so long. It's the cave paintings. Oh, it must mean this. They're great hunters. It's like, no, we don't know. That was the preschool for cave kids, back in the day, and that's the only thing that they could draw. But we're sitting here saying
spending entire semesters discussing it, right? So look, you have to understand that we do it. Brian and I do it, even though Brian and I travel together. We eat together, we talk in the car, we're together all the time when we're on the road, and then we teach together. And so the one morning in Detroit, I just come back from what I thought was a great workout, and I'm a very organized freak. I have mental problems. So I've got my 2 juice glasses, my 2 coffee glasses, I've got my yogurt and my roll, and I've got them all lined up vertically on my table, which is a plane. And I keep walking back and filling things in left to right and up and down. And so Brian comes in and just casually goes, "Hey, how many people are eating here?" The minute that he said that, I was crushed, because I was thinking, look how fat I am. He's saying I'm eating too much. He's making a value judgment. That was never the intent. So you have to remember that when you're tuning your message to transmit, you have to sometimes understand, almost always understand, what the intended recipient is seeing. And is it consistent, context and relevance, with what you intended? I'll give you a very simple example. Other than that emotional example, Chevy had a very, very important car called a Nova.
Yeah.
Okay. Now worked in most of North America, except for our southern border and all of Mexico and Latin America. Why? Because Nova means no go. It's not moving. Okay. But Brian, how was that overcome? It was the sheer power of Chevy and the name and the look of that car that people go, okay, I get it. And guess what it became? It became Left to Greg. It became an inside joke that existed for a tremendous amount of time, and people acquiesced and assimilated over that time. That doesn't mean it's what it meant. It doesn't mean that, oh, by the way, like a future civilization coming in and going, why would they build a car that didn't go? That was never the intent, but it occurs. It
Well,
occurs
and
every day.
that's a sort of a historical perspective of why those things get wrong too, because we look back and go, oh, well, you must have meant this. It's like, well, that's
Yep.
not what that person meant at the time when they said that and they wrote that and they published it. And so we sort of have this odd comparative baseline because we don't always go to the right file folders. We don't go to the right
No.
area of the brain or the right experiences to draw value or attach value to what it is someone's saying, simply because of that error of misunderstanding the intent behind something. And
Yep.
we have, like, because we use both, right? We have a taxonomy in what we do, but we also have our own lexicon. Like everyone knows listening to this, like, because we've had people reach out before and say, like, hey, could you guys put out like a vocab list of some of these terms that you could. It
Seriously.
was just hilarious
Yeah.
because I'm like, we're so used to doing it. Like you always call a car a sled, right? And it's just
Yeah,
part
I
of
don't know why, and I don't know how long, but I can't think
and
of it in another term, you know?
yeah, and so it always comes out, and people are like sled, and it's like, if you haven't heard that before, oh, vehicle, right? And even that, the difference in, like, I know in the Marine Corps was always called a negligent discharge, but then the Army
Yep.
called it an accidental discharge,
Yep.
and Marines be like, well, no, you're negligent. It's like, I think accidental is probably a little bit more descriptive of what actually occurred, because I'm
Yep.
sure, or unintentional, like you said, is a
Right.
more accurate
Because
term because they didn't mean to do it.
I'm thinking in legal terms in the
Yeah.
courtroom, and that's not legal terms on the street. Yeah. And remember when, so we've got hundreds of students, miles of terrain, buildings, uniforms, weapons, and then we've got vehicles that we're using to make these scenarios realistic for soldiers, sailors, air Marines that are going forward into combat. And so I have to speak quickly to make these things move, because once the buses come to the range, everybody's checked out and they're going home. And in between, it's really hot and I'm going to deploy. So the ball better be up in the air. The seal might be dancing the whole time, or I'm going to tune out. So I would have to abbreviate how I thought of things. So that sled wasn't just a normal sled, that was a baby sled. Okay. And that sled that the terrorists were using to do the abduction and the beheading, well, that was the death sled. And then this, I still run into people that still use those
Those
terms
terms,
today.
yeah. It's
And I laugh my ass off. Do you remember that? Because then the idea was that this group of role players, they're just for seeing, they're not for doing. So they're the meat puppets. And then we go through. Well, what happens is, again, I intentionally invoked those jargon bits to be descriptive enough that you would catch on and be able to fill in the rest of the story. And I tried to use the right words to make that so it would become sticky and be part of your file folder. And unintentionally, I created a whole subgenre of language
yeah.
that's still used today when we go to bases and they go, oh, that's the baby sled that's pulling up. And I go, hey, do you know where that term came from? The guy goes, no, man, it's always been used. Yeah, it wasn't. And I can show you the exact date. That's what I love about language. But Brian, there's differences. Why do we say a picture paints 1,000 words? Because it does. So pictures, even though we can interpret them differently, say a thing, an entire story, because there's so much to it. But with language, we have to add words, and then we change words and we adapt words, and then we've got stuff like inflection, and then we've got different cultures that have different languages, but they have jargon too. Like my mom and aunt spoke street German because they grew up as street kids outside of Königsberg and Bayern. Okay. So they didn't go to school because there was a war going on. And they invented Pig Latin in German that had nothing to do with our Pig Latin. It's a completely different thing. So they could communicate when they were with other gang members. And my mom and my aunt's siblings could talk and nobody else would be able to understand what they're going. Do you understand how amazing that is? Brian, we could do a college course on just the German street pig Latin to
Yeah.
survive World War II. That's what's amazing about it. And so when people go, we only use 10% of our brain. One,
No,
you're not
that's not
using any
true.
of it. You're an idiot.
Yeah.
Two, think of how complex language is and how simple we try to make it when we're doing something like, well, the language of de-escalation. Shut up. What are you
Yeah,
thinking?
that's
This is so obtuse. This is such a huge concept. But why do we try to break it down to intent? Because intent makes our language manageable. It makes the outcomes achievable and repeatable. And I think that's science, isn't it? You know,
well, yeah,
at
and
the end of the
that's
day.
that's the thing about language. So we're sort of coming at it from both sides here.
Yeah,
Saying that it's important when you're putting your name on something or calling something or what you're using to describe something, but it also only it's only as important as the intent behind it that you meant. Meaning,
precisely.
because like you just talked about it, like the de-escalation language thing. Like what I get it. Like for perfect example, you don't ever tell someone to calm down because no one in the history of being told to calm down ever
Ever.
goes, oh, okay, you're right, I should.
They're going to go high
But
and right. Yeah.
but if you say, hey, your behavior is inappropriate for the setting, I need you to get control of your behaviors. Well, that's different because one, I'm not telling you you're the problem in a sense. I'm saying you have options here. You can take control of what's going on, and I'm articulating the situation. I'm
Yes.
not just saying, hey, you're being a dick. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I mean
Which in some context, your being a dick is hugely important. You're at
yes,
a wedding. Your daughter is crying. You've had a couple too many drinks, and the best man steps up and goes, "Hey, you're being a dick." What is that? That's an attention grabber. Now my
yeah,
world just got smaller, and now I can start extrapolating other words and behaviors, right, that are going on. So let's call that another subset of emergency language. Stop is part of an emergency language. No, but again, what's the intent behind those? You can say no when somebody asks you, do you want more coffee? Or you can say no because the person's about to kill somebody. So those things in our brain are separate and distinct.
yes.
We
Wait,
think that when we're
explain.
talking,
Yeah,
it's
I was
yeah.
say, can you
So
explain what you mean by that they're separate and distinct?
exactly. And you brought it up with writing. So writing is a good example. When a person says a word, it's different than me seeing a word. And each one of those letters becomes its separate piece of artwork and hieroglyph and petroglyph and all the different sand architecture that I can make a wonderful thing out of, or what are those the chia pet that I carve and make into a Scooby Doo. What happens is each time that you are reading something, or when somebody is saying something to you, your brain is deconstructing, reconstructing it, and fitting a model that your brain has created because you're unique and different. Now, if we've all gone to the same school and we all understand the same alphabet, then we also have to understand that there's lowercase and uppercase. There's capital letters, there's underlined, there's bold. So each one of those takes precedent. And you're going, well, how long do I have to process that? Well, nanoseconds, gigaseconds,
Right.
right? So the idea is that that when we went to verbal and written language,
Hmm.
we constructed different neural paths. And sometimes those neural paths skim over relevant, emergent, dangerous things faster than they would if it was a visual clue. So light, motion, edges, why are they there? Light, okay, triggers me that there's a difference between light and dark for survival. Motion, something's moving towards me or away from me. That's good for hunting or me being hunted. Then edges, I can tell something from the environment or background to determine its likely location and whether it's closing in on me or not. That's not capable. My brain cannot do that calculus with
Yeah.
words. And we're
Yeah.
still learning words. So we're still learning words and assimilating language, and then finding out that there's nuanced language that a kid uses that a computer can't, and that AI uses that I can't. So that complexity is what it. I don't want to make this bigger than it is, but that's the complexity of calling a gosh damn horse twister, right? We don't see the harm in it. And then the person taking it says, oh, that's beautiful, anti-M, twister. And then somebody goes, yeah, but Twister was a cyclone and destroyed that entire village in Kansas. You see what I'm trying to say? We come at it differently. So survival oriented vision looks at the situation, it prioritizes information, and then sends out and receives chemicals to make us do things quicker. So sedentary lifestyle makes us live less long, but we also take less chances
Yeah.
in our environment, and
Yeah.
we don't get exposed. We get
It's
exposed to heart disease, but we're
yeah.
certainly not going to get shot,
There
run over by a car, or robbed. You see? So
those are the trade-offs with it, right? I
you're
mean,
exactly right.
there's
And so
no
language is a whole bigger issue, but with it comes pitfalls. And that's why, Brian, what do we value? We value a good book. What do we value? We value some of Shakespeare's soliloquies. What do we value? The Bible is still the best
Well,
selling book.
it,
Is it all because of faith, or is some of it because it's a gosh darn good read? You see
but
what I mean?
that's a perfect example of, because it ties back to what I was talking about earlier. Like, why do so many people go when they adapt a film from a
Yep.
book, and a lot of people go, well, I really like the book better. Well, why did you
Yep.
like that book better? Because you created the story in your head, and then
And
so
the
what
film
you yeah
and the
you did
characters.
it.
You're exactly
They were
right.
your characters, was your story. You experienced it
Yep.
how
Yep.
whatever your brain came up with. So when it went to the screen, you go, wow, this is different than the book. It's like, well, even if they stuck exactly to the story in the book
Yes.
and used the script word for word, it doesn't matter. You're having that sort of there's that turbidity, there's a cognitive dissonance there because it's different
Brilliant.
than your story. And so that's and I appreciate bringing up the why people enjoy reading so much, and it's because you have to create it in your brain. You
You're
have to do it.
exactly right.
And it's a difference between, even like, I like listening to some books too, like the audiobooks while I'm doing stuff. But it's so different than reading, and it all depends on
It
who the
really is.
narrator is, right? I got my guy. Oh, I'm sending one too. Like, my new favorite, who's been my favorite for a while. My favorite philosopher. He's not a philosopher, but I love his take on philosophy. He's a physicist, Brian Greene. When I read his books, it's awesome because his voice is like nerdy enough, but exciting enough that I understand the complexity of the topic and engage with me. But if I try to listen to like Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about, hey, and we're out in the outer space, I'm like, hey, I might want to order a drink or something. And I go so off topic because I'm like,
That's
hey,
so funny.
it's too cool for me. It's too slick. Like, I want this to be
And you
technical.
can't,
And
right?
like, I have to dive into it. Now I'm like kind of off track. And so listening and reading are two completely different things.
We perform to train, educate, and entertain. And that's why we're exhausted at the end of our training day. And
Right.
that's why people come to our training. And that's why people said, I've been to a lot of your training. No 2 days are the same. Well, first of all, it's the audience, it's the venue, it's the day, it's us. Are we on our mark? It's the slide, the
Yeah.
topic. So much goes through it because we're creating a performance. And let me give you just a sidebar, because both of us love film and both of us love music. So there's a film, The Front Page, and a great story, old. Very first was a
Yeah, I
stage
don't know
play,
that one.
then became a black and white film in the 30s. Then in 1940, you get Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell to play the characters. Well, the original idea of this was Cary Grant and Walter Winchell were going to be the two men, two fast-talking reporters. There's a guy that's going to be executed in 24 hours. Can we get to the truth? A great film, and anybody, if you want to watch it. But what happened is, when they were trying to pitch the film, because remember, it was already a stage play. It was already a film about 5 or 6 years ago with Manoj, whatever that guy's name is. I can't think of Alberto or whatever. But now this director, Howard Hawks, is going to go in and go, hey, I want to pitch this to a studio. So the studio's sitting around and they got Cary Grant. Everybody goes, oh, we love Cary Grant. So Cary Grant is reading for the script. But guess what they don't have? They don't have enough men in the room to read the other parts. So one of the producers and one of the directors says, well, my secretary is here. They called him that back then. I'm not meaning anything insulting by it. Have my female secretary read with Cary Grant for Walter Winchell's part. And
Hmm.
everybody had the epiphany, and they go, holy shit,
Oh
this works
man.
as a boy and a girl.
Yeah.
And then one guy said, hey, they'll be divorced, but they're getting back together. And the other said, yeah, and Brian, that happened because two different people spoke the same words,
Yep.
but in a different context, at a different time, in a different office, and one of them happened to be a woman. That's magic. To me, that's the kind of story that keeps me going. When I do 100 lessons learned, I'm just typing away. I've got journals full of shit like that. Brian, that could not have happened with just visual, right? It had
Mhm.
to have the words associated with it. And while it wasn't their intent, look at that amazing outcome. I think the outcome is beautiful. But if an outcome can be that beautiful, guess what else can happen? They can mistake everything that I meant. And now I show up to watch the opening of the film and I go, what's this shit?
Yeah.
And you go, well, wait a minute, you sent me the note. Well, this isn't what I intended, and that's the key. The key gating mechanism throughout our evolution must be intent. It must be general or specific intent, and whether those outcomes were desired or unintentional. I
Well,
think if we break things down that way, Brian, I think it remains in the scientific realm, and we can't fault somebody for saying that. But why do we have freedom of speech?
Yeah.
Freedom of
Oh,
speech,
yeah.
and do you have the ability to have recourse? Well, recourse and discourse are words that I love, because discourse is when we disagree with something and we do it often.
Hmm.
Recourse is me being able to come back and raise my hand and go, this was fucked. I
Yeah.
got the short end and I didn't deserve it. I love that. But what were those policies in a tribe? They were much more brutal because we didn't have as many choices as we now have with language. Language gives us a superfluous amount of choice, sometimes too many choices. You ever go to a restaurant and see so many items on the menu that you're
Roald,
sitting there
that's
going,
the Cheesecake Factory problem, right?
oh my
I
gosh,
can't
yeah.
I get anxiety because their
Well,
menu is like reading a novel, and I'm like just
two problems with Cheesecake Factory. One, we were introduced to a drink called an old fashioned. Okay. And it broke the bank. But the second thing is, you're exactly right. They've got 9 chapters in salads alone.
yeah.
You get what I'm trying to say? The
I
guy
can't.
reels the book out to you, right? Come on.
No, and that's a good point. That's the same thing with a lot of these streaming services and Netflix and all that stuff. You're like, you people that I can't find anything because yeah, you have too many options. Like
I
that's the
can't find
problem.
anything to watch.
There's
And I have
30,000.
8,800
Yeah.
channels, right?
So
So,
you have too many options. But it also gets into why humans can communicate at a
yes,
very basic level without speaking the actual same language, right?
yes,
There's so much universality because when you literally speak a foreign language and I don't know that, you don't know English and I don't know, let's say German, right?
yeah,
But we can still get along and work together and figure things out as we go. It's not just going to be like, I don't know, this person, we will never figure
yep,
this stuff out. No, because there's enough going on in the situation between two humans that are so similar enough to figure things out as you go along without ever speaking a
exactly.
word to each other. And that's why we focus, obviously, that's why we focus so much on behavior, but two, it's how language can really make things spiral out of control. I mean, just by the wrong name, by the wrong word, by some
Yes,
even just a mispronunciation,
absolutely.
things can go so far south. I mean, where I grew up is like you get someone's name wrong. It's like, hey man, you don't call someone out of their name. Like, you don't do like
Right.
it's like you pronounce my name wrong. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading this off of a piece of paper, but someone's immediately offended by that. It's like, you don't call me that. It's like, shit, man, I didn't mean to call
Yeah.
you that. It was
No.
this is what it, but
How long have you worked with me? Do I ever call anybody in class by their name? No. I
yeah,
created a nickname early on, and then they became
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And this
Shoehorn.
table is Blue Man Group. Yeah, exactly.
Remember Shoehorn?
Okay, but everybody gets my intent because they can read the context and the relevance because I'm there, and I only saw that fail once. Shelley at the ranch, probably 15, 18 years ago now, had just come in from a ride. And Shelley's a perfect cowgirl, man. She looks the role. She can ride. She's just hard as nails. And she went to the office at the Duden Guest Ranch that we owned, and there were a grandmother and a granddaughter that were there ready to sign in. And Shelley went in, and Shelley goes, "Morning, boys. How are things?" or something, because
Yeah, yeah.
Shelley,
Shelley's just
she's
yeah,
always there, and she's so engaging and
yeah.
wonderful. And the grandmother lost her shit. The grandmother says, "Well, clearly we're not boys, we're ladies, and you need to treat us like ladies or something." And Shelley was like, "Nope, not today," because
Yeah,
Shelley's like, "Hey, the customer's not always right. Kiss my ass." But
yeah.
the idea was, it was the first time in, God, over 40 years knowing Shelley, that I saw her on an uneven start
Right.
because she was joking and the joke didn't make it across. But again, there's classic obstructionists in the world.
Yeah,
There's
that's
people that say something. There's people that walk their talk, and there's people
yeah.
that talk their walk. And the idea is that was so rare, it's remarkable. And I'm telling you that why? Because now it becomes a lesson. So lessons are how we navigate life. Repetitive behavior, meaning patterns, is how we navigate life. So when we put those together, then what we come out with is a language. And a language is so much more meaningful than just words and letters and paragraphs and all those other things. It's the story that's told by the environment and the story within the story, and many times the unintended story. We have to consider all of those during an investigation. And any surveillance is, in fact, an investigation.
Yeah.
It's just being conducted in real time.
It,
And what I mean by surveillance is any encounter, because
yeah.
that's how I treat them. Every encounter, as I'm walking up to you, I'm looking at the big picture, and I'm looking at small things, and looking at the gait of your walk and how you're dressed and the wear of your sleeve when you shake my hand. Brian, you know me and I know you, and that's the type of stuff we value. And that's how we determine what likelihood we're about to face.
Yeah. And
Is it dangerous? Is it deadly? Is it fun?
it and that helps determine the relevance of what you're, of that observation sometimes,
Absolutely.
or the relevance
Absolutely.
of whatever it is that you picked up on, because and this kind of goes back to sort of the takeaways for today, in a sense, is that what we choose to call something can have, massive second, third order effects,
Totally
and
agree.
it can completely change the relevance of what we're trying to get across. It can change the meaning of it, and it can change how it's received, which is, again, why we always focus so much on intent, because even to the social media examples, like
Yep.
when there's outrage over something, I always tell people, well, what was their intent with that post, and what was your intent with your comment? What are you trying to do here? And
Right. The
because
more air between those,
well, right,
wow.
and
Right.
sometimes it's people don't think that much about it. They aren't that deliberate about when they're doing, but they're not realizing the potential of it, right? Meaning
Yes.
the more deliberate you are in some of these things, especially when it comes to any type of lexicon that you're using, whatever those terms are, what are those descriptive things that you're using to explain to something,
Yes.
are so incredibly powerful that it can completely shape or reshape the conversation, just based on something that you weren't even thinking of. And that's why, it explains why we use some of those terms over and over again,
Totally.
like those mission focus and predatory looks. It's like, look, here's all the physiology behind that. Here's all the neuroscience
Yep.
behind that, but do you understand what I mean when you say that? It's like, oh yeah, I get mission focus now. That's when someone's so down and in, they're so busy that they bump into someone because they didn't even see them. Okay,
Exactly.
so if I look for those things, and then I couple that with what a predatory look is, like, well, everyone
That's
in your mind right now can think of you're listening to this. What is a predatory look? You've seen something like that. Okay,
right.
let's call it this.
But
So
it's
when I add them
meaningless
all up,
out of context. So,
exactly.
so
It's
why did we spend 2.5 years writing a textbook? Because we wanted to make sure that when you read it, you go, ah, this means this. And we're not together. And I wasn't able to use a dry erase board and show
right.
you, and you didn't see my passion or smell my exasperation. So that's why it's so important that before you launch, listen, we're not talking about your day-to-day conversations,
Hmm.
with the cabbie in
Yeah.
the car, but I'll give you a higher level one, and again, non-attribution, but working on a program for very important beltway type folks, and one of the people talking said, "Yeah, that red dot is on me," and I immediately turned 3 shades of purple, thinking, "Wow, there are 2 operators in this room and me, an outsider, that are looking in. And we all know that what you mean is the sniper with the scope, putting the SOFLAM on the target, meaning the rubber hits the road with me. If, mea culpa in
Yeah.
Latin. That's what he meant when
Yeah.
he said those words. But we were speaking to an international audience of over 100 people,
Yeah.
and in that context, that went so many different places. It was like Casper the fucking ghost sneaking around in that room, and you saw it going through people and changing people and people writing it down and people looking it up. Brian, that's what I'm saying. Sometimes a casual offhand remark can go to areas you never intended. And that's why we spend so much time in rehearsal. That's why we script certain things, and other things are just us discussing in a car. That's why Left of Greg
Yeah.
is opinion-based testimony,
Right.
and it doesn't come into the classroom. You
Right.
get
And
what I'm
and and
saying?
and that's why we kind of make a clear distinction too between the
Yeah, I
podcast and we're
think so.
teaching, because the intent is different. Where this is a
It is.
conversation to talk about different topics, free form, unstructured, unrehearsed, unedited, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just is very
Unintelligent
yeah, that too.
on this side of the.
That's and then that's very different than taking
You're right.
a deliberate approach, and you can't, what I see go wrong, which is kind of some of the examples you've even brought up, is when those two things get mixed. It's your offhand comment making a joke or whatever, but that's fine in some contexts. But when you do it in here, it's like, well, wait a minute, is that part of what you're teaching me? Is that part of what you're training me? Is that what you're telling
Right.
me is
And where do I
important?
put that note? Where do I put the arrow to tie that to my curriculum, to your remainder? And I'm so with you on that, Brian, because that's why you're in the line at the church's fried chicken, and the guy in front of you is taking too long, and you say something, and it's like, hey, partner, speed it up. And now we got to turn, and hey, I'm not your partner. And
Yeah,
it's immediately to the wrong zone. And we wonder why, how did that homicide occur?
exactly.
I never asked that. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I've seen how that can spin wildly out of control. And the next thing you know, that orbiter is going into the sun rather than following its path to the moon, so we can have another great adventure. The idea is that some things like computer use and AI are completely universal, and it doesn't matter the language or the culture or anything else. But that thing I sent you this morning, when a person was talking about respect and saying respect changes from culture to culture. No, it
No, it
doesn't.
doesn't.
Respect is
It's-
one of those few binary things. You have it, you don't. You're
yeah,
getting it, you're not. You're
yeah,
giving it, you're not. You get
yeah.
what I'm trying to say? And if you can hold those few things together, then you can understand how people work. And that's our goal. Our goal is to say these patterns have been around because they tend to be cohesive and hold tribes together. These patterns are around because they tend to make people aggressive, and that's how wars start, right?
Hmm.
And so when what we're doing is we're trying to create these big lenses to small, not to burn ants, but to flip them around and act as a binocular so I can see a long way. It was Eric Collier's birthday yesterday, and we both loved the big shaved ape. And I remember we used to joke on the range all the time, and Collier would say, man, that enemy's a long way away. And I'd grab the binos and turn them around, and he'd go, holy shit, they're on the wire. We would laugh and laugh, and people didn't understand that. That's what I meant by this comment, Brian. If you're not focusing on the intent, then you could be wildly off that base when you approach the target or the X or the bar.
Yeah, no, it's a reminds me, there's a meme that it was like, it was three, so it was a Venn diagram with three circles, and one had a bunch of words. It said, talking to your dog, talking, the other one was, talking to a baby, and then the third one was starting a fight. And then where they overlapped was, hey buddy. And it was so funny because it's like you talk to a dog like, hey buddy,
That's
he's like,
so
hey buddy, and
simple.
then it's like starting a fight
Exactly.
like, hey buddy. And it's like, oh, and
No, you're so
I
right.
love it when it comes to language like that, because it's so
But what did we
incredible.
do?
Yeah.
The drawing, the caricatures, the cartoon, the diagram was what put it together as being funny, right?
Yeah.
Because if not, you would have had to act out each of those components, but your brain did the rest. So that's the essence of critical thinking. Did you receive enough artifacts and evidence and information from the original exposure to deduce or induce the rest, right? Isn't that what we're really talking about here? Because that comes down to intent. Hey, before I go off the handle, what did they intend by that, right? And
It,
we don't do that as much.
no, and I think that's kind of a good point too, or
Yeah,
good. That's kind of the overall thing we're getting at here with this
I
episode. So
think
I
so.
would say the overall takeaway is that it goes back to what we always talk about: intent and demonstrations of intent with behavior, but it's with words too. Is what did this person mean? What did they intend by that? And
Because the
not try to,
transcript is not the same as being in the courtroom, baby,
oh,
right?
it's
And being on Zoom or a Teams isn't the same as being in the room. Consider those, folks. Consider those today. Take just a minute, and when you're staring at your desk before you get up to go to meet with somebody, think of those things. They'll make you smarter, stronger, and harder to kill.
yeah,
And might save your life, right?
and I don't, we didn't kind of have time to get into it too much, but just because of the mass amount of communication and how much people
Yeah,
are texting and
yeah.
commenting and emailing and all that stuff, because we're doing it so much more, we're not as deliberate and thinking about it as much. So there's an even greater chance that things can spin wildly out of
You're
control by
absolutely
some
right.
comment. I mean, just because of,
Not my comments,
of
not my
course not.
comments, because I sit there and I make sure that I have a picture with my text
Well,
and then 9 different emojis at the
that's
end, and I
why
hit send And
That's
it's
why
so stupid.
that's why all of that stuff was invented. That's why we have emojis and GIFs and memes. That's why
And I'm building the Eiffel Tower every time I send one.
it all came about because a text message or an email
Yeah.
is so devoid of any context that you have to have those things in there.
So that's how Allegory of the Cave is
Right.
formed, because you're still far enough back that you can hear some mumbling, but you're seeing the flicker of the light and you're attributing knowledge and information to things that were never intentional, and I'm really white belt in that, but I think
No,
everybody gets it.
that's the point.
I think
Um,
so.
yeah. All right. Well, anything else to add for the listeners?
No, I got the
No.
Santa suit story, but I don't know if that's
Yeah,
appropriate now.
we'll do that. We'll do that a different
Hey,
time.
that's a perfect story for Patreon.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we'll go over the Santa story on there. So we appreciate everyone listening, and thank you so much. We do have the Patreon site that you can go to, and we do episode extras and all kinds of extra content on there. And then you can also check us out on social media. And if you enjoyed listening to us
How could you
talk for the last
not?
hour, please share the episode with your friends. It helps out a lot. But we thank everyone for tuning in. We appreciate it. And don't forget that training changes behavior.